Donna.
No worries. So I think many of you know us through celebration events like Bike to Work and Bike to School Week, Bike to Shop Days. For those of you who receive regular communication from Hub is actually happening this coming weekend, where you can support cycling and small businesses in the region as well. So, that's something that is also part of our celebratory event series. The other two pillars of our work are around education and advocacy. I'm not going to speak too much around this. There are lots of good information on the work that Hub does on our website at bikehub.ca. So you can log on and find out more. These are some of the images from, I believe, various events, and hopefully we can gather again. Maybe either this fall or the coming year for our Bike to School and Bike to Work Week celebration stations in person. Quick little intro about myself. Here's a bit of a blurry photo of me. My name is Donna. My ancestral name is Tin Tang Tang. You can see it on the screen there. I go by she, her pronouns. I've been with Hub Cycling since 2012 in different capacities. My favorite has been around supporting the work around education and really seeing the difference on the ground of ways in which folks are, the joy, the confidence, the ease and the freedom people find on their bikes, including really folks from all walks of life, different age range, right? And so that's really something that I love doing. So hopefully things that information we're going to share today will also help you become more comfortable and confident in navigating e-bikes and e-biking. So lots of folks joining us. If you're just joining us, welcome. I hope you can hear me and see the screen, the slides. Okay, if there's any technical issues throughout, please type it into the chat and we'll figure that out for you. So very quickly, just to get a sense of where folks are, who's in the room today, just gonna launch a poll. What is your experience with e-biking? And maybe there are, hoping that this poll is, oh, there we go. Okay, so hopefully you can see that on your screen. What is your experience? Never done it, tried it a few times, once or twice a week, some or most days a week. Let's see where we all are, and possibly there are lots of knowledge, different knowledge and skills in this room as well. So that will be really lovely to get a sense of. Great, just gonna give you another few moments if you choose to complete this poll, just to give us a sense of where you are with e-bikes and e-biking. Okay. All right, just because of time, I'm gonna end the poll here and let's take a look. Let's see. Okay. So seems like there are, half of us who have never done it. Glad you found us. Yeah, hopefully this webinar will give you the information you need to start considering it, whether or not it's the right thing for you, and perhaps even in terms of buying, right, an e-bike, purchasing an e-bike later on down the road. I'm glad to see that for some of you, you already either have access to an e-bike or ride it regularly. Sounds like a few of you do it some or most days a week. Awesome. Please do feel free to chime in either via chat or during the Q&A session segments rather, if there's any tips, advice you might have. Okay, for us, I'm hoping that this is not just me talking at you, that this will also be very interactive for peer learning and sharing as well. Okay, so with that said, for those of you who perhaps either have never ridden an e-bike before or only rode it once, unsure about it, what are some of the current reservations and challenges that you may be experiencing with e-bikes or e-biking? And again, this is to give us all a moment to reflect on what are we here for? What are we the most interested in learning about today? And hopefully this can help inform ways in which that this webinar will be helpful for you as well. Okay, I'm seeing great. Seeing most folks taking a moment to fill in the poll. Thank you. Just give you another few seconds here. And it may be all of them, right? Okay. So just because of timeout and the poll here, and let's see, I'll share that with all of you. Okay, seems like we've got a winner here. Yes, for many of you, perhaps it's the kind of e-bike to purchase that you're wanting to find out more information about, what factors, right? What elements to consider when you're purchasing an e-bike. There are some of you that are not sure whether or not you want to invest in an e-bike. So hopefully some of the information that we share today also will help clarify for you maybe moving forward whether or not that's a good idea. And so all of these things that we've included in here hopefully will cover to some extent during today's webinar. Okay, and that I'm going to give you an overview of the workshop. So we're going to go over this, and again, being that this is an intro to e-bikes and e-biking workshop, it's going to be basic, however comprehensive. Okay, you can see how the different topics that we're going to cover, and there are going to be there's a short Q&A segment in the middle of the workshop or the webinar, and toward the end, I'm hoping that we'll have some time to also stick around for any additional questions, okay, for you. So with that said, let us begin. Before we begin, I see that there are lots of comments in the chat. Mike, is there anything that I should know before I dive in?
I think we can save it for the Q&A.
Great, awesome. Okay, so let's get started with the very basics. Okay, so what exactly is an e-bike? I'm not going to read over this definition here, but pretty much you can see from the three images an e-bike, when it comes down to it, all of them has a motor, right? Different locations this motor might be located in and on, or at. I'm going to dive into that a little bit more in detail later. There's going to be a battery. Okay, again, different locations on the bike that battery might be located. And third, most e-bikes have a controller, and this controller most often will indicate a speedometer, okay, how far you've traveled and how much batteries left in your e-bike or how much your e-bike is charged. Okay, there's going to be a battery indicator. So we'll get to, as I said, the type and class of e-bikes, and plus the motor and battery locations a little bit later on in this workshop. So with that said, for those of you who are thinking about purchasing an e-bike and really trying to come to a decision of, is this worth it? Okay, so we're going to do a little quick comparison of the pros and cons. So again, reading over this, these are five, the most commonly shared kind of benefits from people who ride e-bikes, who have e-bikes, can access e-bikes. Just wanting to focus on this third point here, increased accessibility and possibilities. I think traditionally speaking, folks have often thought about e-bikes as, potentially giving folks with either physical injuries or with, some physical limitations, more increased possibility and accessibility. We're encouraging you and inviting you to even think bigger than that. So e-bikes really simply opens up possibilities for all types of riding. So whether or not this is hauling kids in a trailer, right? Whether or not it is certainly for folks with some physical limitations, riders who want to keep up with others in the flow of traffic a little bit more, right? Wanting to ride a longer distance without too much of breaking too much of a sweat, depending on, maybe there's no facilities, under trip facilities at your office space, possibly. And also, I think many of you might have seen an increase of e-mountain bikes on the market, right? So e-mountain bikes really increases the accessibility for mountain bikers because they no longer have to rule out routes with steep hill climbs. They can just literally e-bike, motor up the hill and do their downhill riding anywhere and everywhere, right? So think about that in terms of, again, assessing whether or not you want to purchase an e-bike to replace your current, maybe even motor vehicle, right? And again, when we talk about cons, these are only really cons when compared to conventional bicycles. Okay, so again, yes, there's a bit of an age restrictions here. It's not, unfortunately, accessible to folks under 16 as of now. Only more expensive than a conventional bike, right? Probably a lot cheaper than a motor vehicle, than a motorcycle even, right? So think about expensive in a very relative way, okay? Otherwise, just know that it probably will take a bit more both, skills as well as investment for maintaining an e-bike compared to a conventional bicycle because of some of the more complex and specialized parts, okay? Otherwise, we're going to try to clarify some specific bylaws and regulations for e-biking, specifically in BC, and know that these types of bylaws and regulations are different. They change depending on the province, the region, the country that you're in, okay, as well. So really needing to stay up to date. That's something just to consider of reading up on these changing bylaws and regulations. So how do you choose the right one? Good question. We're going to try to organize this really nicely for you. So there are really 4 factors you want to consider, okay? So number 1, what type of e-bike will be the right type for you? And when we say this, it's largely determined by the purpose of why you want to purchase this e-bike and what you want to accomplish or to use this e-bike for. Like I said earlier, is it to replace a motor vehicle? Is it going to be once in a blue moon riding this e-bike, or is this going to be a daily kind of commuting type of bike that you're wanting to invest in? Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about that. The second factor is class. And we'll dive into this a little bit deeper. There are 3 different classes. It really helps to be clear around BC Parks regulations in terms of what class of e-bike is allowed on certain bike paths, right? So you want to make sure, especially if you're wanting to access those bike paths, that you purchase a specific class of e-bike. The third factor is around cost. So the basic question that we're trying to answer here is more expensive better? Okay, what are you looking for in terms of cost? The fourth and last but not least factor is around performance. When we talk about performance, it's really around range and charging. So essentially the question we're trying to answer here is how long can an e-bike go before charging is necessary? Right? And this is affected by many different things. We'll elaborate on this a little later. So we'll start with type, okay? So as I mentioned earlier, pretty much anything you can think of, any type of conventional bike now can be found in an e-bike shape form. So you can see in this collage of images, There are e-commuter bikes, e-mountain bikes, e-folding bikes, e-cargo bikes, right? Again, depending on what you want to use it for. Some of the things that you might want to consider factor-wise, okay, is number one, what type of riding you want to do, right? Number two is how far will you be riding? And when we say how far you want to be riding, we're also taking in performance into consideration, which we'll later on talk about, is essentially how big of a battery does your e-bike have and how much battery can last you, right? And is it 2 hours? Is it more? You do want to consider your cycling experience level, right? And how fast you may want to travel as well. And the terrain that you'll be covering. Okay, and of course, your budget. Depending on your budget, know that, of course, cargo bikes, especially, as well as some dual suspension, especially e-mountain bikes, may cost more than an say, commuter bike. So the clarity of what kind of riding you want to do, how far you want to travel, how fast you want to travel, determine the kind and the location of the motor and battery that you may want to look into. Okay. So again, this really goes into, this is a bit of a consideration of the type of e-bike you might want to get. So when it comes to motors, there are a few different or main types of motors that you will find on an e-bike. Okay. There are mid-drive motors, which you'll find pretty straightforward in the middle, right? The bike's drivetrain. And there's also a hub drive, which you will find at the front or the rear hub of your bicycle wheels. So I'm just gonna simply, I won't read over the text that you see on the screen here, but I'm gonna just quickly tell you the main difference between the two types, okay? Hub drives have existed longer even than mid drives, okay? They tend to be cheaper and a bit more versatile. They are excellent for anybody needing a reliable e-bike for long, mostly flat commuting, okay? So because the motors are located in the hubs, it should probably be straightforward for you to see this, that it's not gonna be as easy to change a flat, right? Especially if it is the flat, if you get a flat in the wheel that the actual motor is located in, okay? Another disadvantage to hub drive is that the weight distribution is not gonna be very even, right? Depending on which wheel that motor is located in, that wheel is gonna be heavier in terms of the weight. However, if you want to convert a conventional bike into an e-bike, hub drive is found fairly common in conversion kits. Okay. So that being said, we're going to move into mid-drive. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of mid-drives? Mid-drives are usually smaller and lighter. Okay, and it's more efficient and can allow for greater torque, meaning there's without expanding nearly as much battery capacity, okay, than hub drives. And so they are specifically well suited for riding hilly areas. So if it's a really hilly commute that you have, and off-road use. So if you are thinking about riding, especially in rural areas, gravel, right? Or of course, mountain biking on trails specifically. So the centered location of these hub drives creates a pretty balanced ride. And so changing a tire on a mid-drive bike, of course, also, you know, because it's not located in the hub, it's much easier. And so typically you'll find a hub, or rather you'll find mid-drives on mountain bikes, okay, most often. However, if you ever want to convert a conventional bike into an e-bike, you're not gonna find mid-drive conversion kits, okay? It cannot be retrofitted easily. So the question folks often ask is, so which one is better? We really recommend that you go to a shop, you try out both of these drives, so mid-drive or hub drive motors, and see, number one, oh, how is the weight distribution? How comfortable is it for me? And of course, think about what kind of terrain you're planning to ride this e-bike on the most often, right? To make that choice, and talk to, of course, the bike shop representatives as well. So again, just a reminder, lots of mountain bikes come with mid-range motors, or rather mid-drive motors, and more commuter city bikes are hub-based. Okay. Now, there is going to be another kind of motor that you might see on an e-bike, and these are less often now spotted, but again, this is really easy, probably found most often in rather in conversion kits. It's called friction motors, and friction motors are mounted, as you can see, directly to the seat post. Okay, so there are some pros and cons to this as well. Pros, as I mentioned before, can easily convert a conventional bike to an e-bike with a friction motor. Tend to be pretty simple in terms of a system, right? However, a few disadvantages. Number one is that it does not work as well in wet weather, right? When it starts to rain, if you're trying to ride the e-bike in rain, it's not gonna work as well in terms of the friction element. Number two, especially if you're doing off-road e-biking, these types of motors are not going to work very well with the knobby off-road tires. Okay, so just keep those things in mind. And I wanted to go back quickly. I know that for some folks, mid-drive, I don't think we used to be able to find it in conversion kits. I think actually nowadays there's maybe a couple of businesses that actually make mid-drive conversion kits, but tend to be slightly more expensive. Okay, so with that said, again, another consideration, as we had mentioned earlier, of, as there's different locations for motors, there are also different locations for batteries. Okay, so how do you decide where is the best for you and for your type of riding? Okay, so the three most common battery placements, you can see them all in the images on the right here, side of the slide, are in the seat tube. Okay, so that's the one that is on the bottom left image there. The frame down tube, so that's in the ones up at the very top two. Okay. And also on the rear rack, which is the image on the bottom right. Okay, so there are three different locations that you might find battery placements. So just before we go there, just so that typically most batteries last from 3 to 5 years before they start losing some of their efficiency. But if you care for batteries properly, it may extend their life a little bit. And we'll talk about battery maintenance a little bit later. Okay, so seat tube, or rather battery placement. So we'll talk about seat tube placement first. Okay, so the seat tube placement is really great because it does not interfere with any of the gears when you're shifting gears, or the tires, right? You can see, especially if an e-bike, especially if it's a mountain bike, for example, a hardtail specifically, meaning that there's only one suspension in the front, okay, is really good and really well suited for a seat tube placement. And this location also allows the battery to be easily removable. Okay. Now the down tube is the one that probably you'll find the most common in dual suspension mountain bikes, in lots of also city bikes, but also cargo bikes and such. It is the most probably visually straightforward and attractive. The most important thing is that it does weigh weight distribution wise. It weighs centrally. It places the weight centrally on the bike, so then it helps your bike with balancing. Okay. like I said before, mountain bikes prefer this location because it really makes sure that it keeps the rider safe. The rack mount, which is the mount that you see on the bottom right, it raises the bike's center of gravity. So biases more weight, of course, to the rear of your bike. So in which case, this is not necessarily appropriate for if you're doing mountain biking, for example, but it is probably not as big of a deal if you're doing commuter riding, city riding, right? Mostly, especially in flat routes. And it is the easiest and most common for conversion or do-it-yourself kits, okay, you'll find. Again, advice is, what is better? Go and ride it, test it out, talk to a bike shop representative. Now, know that when it comes to batteries, technology advances fairly quickly. So now there are e-bikes that, where there's difference between removable e-battery and integrated battery. So can you tell the difference? I don't know of the 4 images here, which ones are integrated and which ones are removable. They're all looking pretty slick. So the left 2 is the integrated one, and the images on the right are removable. So again, something just for you to consider, especially if you're not planning to ride a long distance on your e-bike. You're like, oh yeah, only like, half an hour here and there, integrated batteries may work. However, if you're planning on longer commutes, right, longer rides on your e-bike, and you really want to make sure that you can have a removable battery to charge in between your trips, right? So because when you think about an integrated battery, you have to get it to a power source and maybe a little bit more hassle some, right, than say just removing the battery and charging it. So I'm hoping that was clear enough. We're going to move on, and I'm sure if there are questions, we're going to pause and answer them during the short Q&A session. So we're going to move from type now on to class. As I mentioned before, there are 3 different classes of e-bikes. Okay. The differences are in this chart right here. So class 1, you can see that class 1 and 2, the motor, the watts, as well as the max speed are the same before the motor cuts off. It cuts off at 32 kilometers an hour. Okay, the only difference between class 1 and class 2 is that class 1 is pedal assist only, meaning that the motor is only operated through when you're pedaling on the bike, and once you stop, the motor will automatically stop. Versus the class 2 kind of operates on either a pedal assist or a throttle assist, meaning you can use the handlebar, or rather right in the near handlebar, a throttle. And again, there's a slight difference there. So it's really helpful if you can clarify with your bike shop representative which class, again, a particular e-bike is falls under. Class 3 is a little bit more rare. Again, you can see the max speed is higher, okay? And which also the difference, or rather the reasons why we want to differentiate these 3 is because there are only certain e-bikes that are allowed on, depending on the municipality, the province that you might be in, okay? As I mentioned earlier, geographical locations are key in terms of which one of these class is actually allowed. So pop quiz, okay? Wondering if you want to participate in a quick, hopefully you can see it on the screen here. So what do you think? Which class or classes are allowed on BC Parks trails where mountain bikes and other bikes are already currently allowed? What do you think? Let's see if we have a winner here. All right, I'll give you another moment here on the poll just for time's sake. Okay, so we do have a winner. And majority wins in this case. class 1 is the only class that is allowed on BC Parks trails currently. And I'm going to read you the actual policy here, okay? So people with class 1 bikes can ride on any BC Parks trail where mountain bikes and other cycling is already allowed. People with class 2 and 3 e-bikes can only ride on trails and or roads designated for motorized vehicles, depending on the park. So again, lots of gray areas in here, right? I don't know if I 100% understand the nitty gritty of the details depending on the park. So does this mean I have to read up on, you know, what else do I need to read up on to make sure that I know exactly which park I'm allowed to ride on if I have a class 2 or 3, right? So again, this is a gray area. We just wanted to, this can be a workshop all by itself. We are going to send you some more information around class and around the differentiation of these 3 different classes in the follow-up email with some links that you can access and read up on more. So with that said, now knowing type and class differences, e-bike and e-biking considerations, we're going to move into cost. So here is an image of the price points and price ranges, okay, of e-bikes categorized by brand. I know that it's pretty tiny in terms of print. It may not be very readable for everybody here. Just know that these are all different brands. And this is in US dollars. So when you convert them into Canadian dollars, typically, you know, e-bike averaging about 1,500, I would even say 2,000 to 4,000 are the most common for e-bikes. And you can see that the price is much higher for number one, different brands sometimes, for different types of e-bikes, right? E-mountain bikes and e-cargo bikes specifically are more expensive, on the more expensive end of things. And the price, so is more expensive better? We'll tell you what the price actually reflects. The price reflects a few things. The price reflects its power, okay? So depending on, again, sometimes if a bike has a bigger battery or perhaps a more powerful battery, it may cost more. It does reflect on its brand. So if you don't care about the brand, and I know brand sometimes also, you know, encompasses components, right? The quality of the components. But if you feel like, you know, between one less, you know, one brand and another, yeah, don't really care that much, then you might be able to save a bit of money there, okay? Price also reflects on appearance. Oftentimes, the better it looks, the slicker maybe it looks design-wise, the more expensive. Price also reflects on purpose. Like I said, mountain bikes, cargo bikes, more expensive, okay? And sort of similar to, I mean, obviously the brand, the parts, more expensive the parts, probably the more expensive, of course, the actual bike costs. And this includes the parts inside, okay? But with that said, we typically find that folks who actually have invested in an e-bike often says, do not go for the cheap ones. Buy something that actually is somewhere, you know, I would say don't go for the cheapest, go for something that is slightly, you know, in the mid-range, making sure that you talk to the folks, you know, at the shops, do your research, look at the components, whether or not it's reliable. It doesn't have to be expensive, but is it reliable? Okay. In terms of money also, we just wanted to remind you also that within, oftentimes a more expensive e-bike also has better warranties. Okay, so warranties is something that you also should think about when you get an e-bike. So typical warranties can range widely for different e-bikes, from 90 days to 5 years, and it typically includes every single part in that e-bike. Okay, so in general, you'll find the following ranges in the warranties: 1 to 2 years comprehensive, okay, 1 to 3 years battery, 2 years or more in the motor, 2 to 10 years or lifetime warranty for the frame. So again, this may reflect in what the initial cost of that e-bike is, right? The longer the warranty, the more initial cost it may be for an e-bike. So with that said, I know that in terms of budget, sometimes you have to really compare what your budget is and to what you can afford in terms of what type of e-bike. Okay, so just to balance off the cost, know that there is a rebate available through the BC Scrap It program. Okay, and there, when you click on these links, and again, we're going to include this link to more information for you in a follow-up email. Just know that there are participating bike retailers you have to buy the e-bike from to be able to qualify for it. Okay. Of course, we also have, you can see on this screen grab here, the cargo e-bike rebates as well. And this is for businesses, right? Nonprofits, possibly for purchasing an e-cargo bike for quote unquote business uses or business usage. So that's something that especially if you're running an organization, part of an organization, know that that's available to you as well. Going on a little bit more around cost. So again, for those of you who are considering whether or not this is a good investment for you to purchase an e-bike, just know that there's a few additional cost considerations. Again, this is probably, very reasonable, especially if you're wanting to purchase an e-bike to replace your motor vehicle or to replace it partially, right? So yes, the maintenance cost is going to be slightly more probably than a conventional cost. To know that you probably want to have a tune-up every 6 months, or sometimes people measure this by kilometers. After 800 kilometers usually of riding, you want to get a tune-up. Okay, the cost for a tune-up can range anywhere between, say, 120 to 180 or more, depending on if there's a component on your e-bike that needs to be replaced, or sometimes the motor needs to be repaired, right? So make sure that when you are getting your e-bikes maintained or tuned up, that you look for somebody in a bike shop that specializes in e-bike repair and maintenance. Usually when you go to a bike shop, not everybody is skilled in repairing e-bikes. You have to find your person, okay, at the shop. So depending on where a motor and battery is located, also, say patching a flat tire or any brake adjustments you need to make may cost slightly more, right? Again, remember, sometimes it just takes a lot more labor to do these things. Cost for charging, it's very minimal, right? Generally, a couple dollars can go 500 kilometers, much cheaper than gas, so really worth it if we're comparing this to motor vehicles. And also, depending on, of course, components on your e-bike, say, specifically when we talk about cost for additional important components, we're thinking about a replacement battery, because those batteries do expire after a certain amount of time, whether or not it's 5 years or more, right? And also additional components may include getting yourself a really good lock or lock skewers to secure your wheels and different parts of your bike. Okay. So replacement costs for batteries, this is a question that often people ask, ranges anywhere from $500 to $800 or more. Sometimes it can cost up to $1,000. It really depends on the shape and the capacity of the battery pack for your e-bike. So with that said, I think this is wrapping up cost. Okay, and we're gonna, I do notice the time, we're gonna quickly go over performance and then we're gonna pause for questions, okay? So the last factor to consider is around performance. Okay, so if this screen looks very overwhelming, don't worry. This is a screen grab for one of the tools that you can access to try to calculate how far your bike can go before you have to charge it. And this is called the Ebike Range Assistant. Okay, and we're going to send you a link in the follow-up email. So again, you can see that there are lots of factors that influence the performance, right? Whether or not it's terrain, the battery, the type of drive, type of bicycle, even wind conditions can influence it. So folks often ask, so how do you maximize riding range? So we'll give you a few tips. Okay? So we categorize this into two categories. One is human controlled and the other one is non-human controlled, or otherwise as environmental, okay, known as environmental. So the very first category of human controlled, the more time that you use in eco mode or a lower level of your e-bike setting can extend your battery power or battery life, okay? So especially if you don't need to use a higher, sort of turbo mode, right, can really help save your battery. Tire pressure, just like any other vehicle, and conventional bikes as well, having an e-bike with low air pressure will mean that your battery will have to work harder, right? So pump up those tires before you go out so you can save some battery. Overall weight impacts the range or performance. Okay, so this means when we say overall weight, we mean the person who's riding, the bike itself, and also the cargo weight combined. So if you want your e-bike to go further, try to carry less things on your bike, okay, if that's possible. Last but not least, cadence, meaning especially when you are spinning your pedals faster, okay, at an easier, sort of gear range, spinning the pedals faster can extend your battery life. Okay, so if you have, a few Ks left to home and your battery's running low, go into a lower gear and save your batteries that way. So now, environmental factors for maximizing your riding range, or at least for considering, right, how you can save your range. Know that terrain matters. Riding steeper hills reduces the range, which means because higher, hills often require higher modes on your e-bike. So of course, riding flat terrain will extend your battery life for a bit before you have to charge again. Okay. Wind is a factor. So especially if you're, approaching the limit of your battery range on a really windy day, go a bit slower. Can help you ride farther on less juice on a windy day. Okay. Now, surface area, this is kind of similar to terrain. Just know that rougher terrain, rougher surface area uses more battery, right? So again, something to keep in mind when you're going down, those gravel roads and backcountry trails. Last but not least, temperature also matters, meaning cold temperature reduces battery life. Okay. Extreme temperature, so cold and really hot weather may reduce battery life. That's just like any other electronic device that you may have. Okay, so storing and charging it indoors, for example, in room temperature really helps. And just know that if you're planning to ride your e-bike in the winter, the battery may last a bit shorter or less than, say, when you're riding in the spring or the not too hot days in the summer. Okay, I'm going to pause here for a moment, just very mindful of time here. Any questions before we move on?
Oh, we got questions.
Yes, and again, knowing that there's only so much time, maybe I'll take 2 or 3 questions.
Sure.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. There were some really good questions, and one of them that I think is really important is, How do I avoid tire punctures when riding my e-bike?
Yeah, good question. Just like you would for your conventional bike. So number one, make sure that you pump your tires up in between the PSI range that is indicated on the side of your bike tires, right? Making sure that you don't go too close to the upper limit of your PSI or the pressure, especially on hot days because air expands. Otherwise, this is not something, I mean, obviously, pay attention to the road surface that you're riding on also helps. And I don't know if there's any other responses I have to that.
That's a solid answer for sure.
Great.
I have another question. If a mid-drive motor has more torque, is it better for pulling a trailer?
Yes, I would say so. Yes, absolutely. So mid-drive is better for towing a trailer.
And I think we're going to discuss cleaning and maintenance.
Yeah, so cleaning.
Oops.
I'm just going to mute folks. Cleaning and maintenance are not going to be discussed too much in this. I would say, again, this can be a few hours of a workshop on e-bikes alone. This is just the intro. So for that, I would say attend our bike maintenance workshop, actually. And because a lot of the cleaning and maintenance are going to be similar to conventional bikes, of course, battery maintenance is a huge one for battery and motor maintenance, which means that actually I want to spend the rest of the time talking about that. I can see that there are lots more questions you have that you plugged into the chat. What we would recommend is if there are questions that you feel like were not answered, and unfortunately we have not had the time to answer during this workshop, email us directly after you've received that follow-up email, and we can respond to that directly also back to you. Okay. And if there's anything, Mike, that you feel you are able to answer and respond to in the chat, please feel free as well. Okay. Just
Sounds
for the rest
good.
of the time, great, awesome. Just because we have 10 more minutes left and wanting to respect everybody's time, I'll talk a little bit about carrying and maintaining your e-bike, specifically around especially battery maintenance, okay? Okay, so caring for e-bike. So what are some of the things to keep in mind? So number one, as I mentioned before, find your person in your bike shop. Okay, so not everybody, even if they know how to take care of e-bikes, may not be familiar with your type of e-bike. So ask specifically. There may be shops that don't actually have the person you're looking for. Okay, so really think about finding somebody who is experienced with your type of e-bike. In terms of batteries, okay, the only time that you need to charge your batteries to 100% for most types of riding is when you get it first. Okay, so when your battery is new, charge it up to 12 hours. And when you top off the battery charge, you don't want to overcharge it, meaning that 80% battery is actually the optimal percentage to keep your e-batteries at, to make sure that you extend the battery life. And I know this is not possible for all types of e-bikes. For example, a colleague of mine has an e-cargo bike and she hauls her kids and groceries around all of the time. And every time when she goes out, she does have to charge it to 100%. Otherwise, she won't be able to get home in one go, right, without charging. So yes, there are going to be circumstances where you have to charge it to 100, but just so that you know, 80% is optimal. The type of charger also makes a difference. Okay, so you'll find that there are two different chargers. One is a fast charger, one is a slow charger. Okay, when you purchase chargers. The fast chargers supplied with some higher end e-bikes will charge the battery 25% quicker than a standard charger, which is normally called the slow charger. Okay. So again, just know that, I mean, of course, with a fast charger, this means that your battery will get charged faster, right? However, I think that the first fast charger is a little bit more expensive, and also using a fast charger means that they may take more energy, and you know, probably that battery pack has to withstand a much higher temperature when it comes to fast charging, because when you're fast charging, the battery may overheat depending on the type of battery. Otherwise, if you don't need it to be charging super fast, a regular charger is fine. Okay. Just trying to see here if there's anything else I want to talk about in terms of charging. Gosh, there's so much information here. I think, again, you know, this is really thinking about charging your batteries when you are not using them. So for fair weather riders, when you're not using your e-bike during the winter months, don't just let your e-bike run out of juice completely. Still charge it. Make sure that you're keeping the battery, especially if it is a removable battery, keep it indoors in room temperature. Don't let it fall under, say, 20% battery. Okay. Don't let it completely run out, and that again can extend your battery life. Okay. We talked about this, conserving power as you ride. You know, keeping tires properly inflated can really help with saving your battery life when you're riding. You know, all the rest of the maintenance is not any different than a conventional bike, making sure you check brakes regularly, cleaning, oiling, and inspecting your chain, right? So all of those things are the same as when you would maintain a regular conventional bike. Now, when it comes to riding an e-bike, okay, I won't read over these bullet point forms. I think they're pretty straightforward. I want to focus on two things. Number one is around making turns and braking. So depending on the type of e-bike that you get, whether or not also where the battery and the motor is located, you will find that the center of gravity may feel slightly different when you ride it than a conventional bike that you may own. Okay, so this means when you're making turns, this may require a bit of practicing. It may feel slightly awkward, maybe a little off balance initially. Okay, so practice in your back alley, in a park, making turns with your e-bike. And also in terms of braking, it may take a little bit longer for e-bikes to brake than a conventional bike. So really test those brakes out, right? Make sure they're both working, and really anticipate, like, oh, this is how long it takes for my e-bike to brake. And so when you're on the road riding with other motor vehicles, you're more aware of that response time that you need to factor in. When we talk about maintaining seated position, we just mean that this will really help with center of gravity, making sure that you're balanced at all times. You know, traction, same thing, right? Don't do a wheelie. Don't think that some e-bikes you can't even do a wheelie on, but maintain traction at all times, okay? Okay, so I think we're just checking on the time, a few minutes left. Where can you ride your e-bike? So as we've talked about earlier, right, this is just making sure that you're aware of the difference between class 1 versus class 2 and 3. And this is just a clear write-up of where you can ride class 1, BC park trails, anywhere where mountain bikes and other cycling is already allowed. And class 2 and 3, where there's more restrictions. Okay. So rule of thumb is always around checking with your municipality and province and pay close attention to updates. So specifically for different municipalities, it may even be different bylaws for e-bikes. You can see this is a screen grab of the City of Vancouver bike map. You can see micro mobilities. Where can you ride? E-bikes are allowed pretty much anywhere bikes are allowed except on the seawall. I bet that many of us didn't know that, right? So again, I know that for many folks, maybe they're, you know, folks are not coming down on this really strictly right now, but just know that, you know, if you're an e-bike, maybe even turning off, going back to the eco mode, riding a little bit slower on that seawall will help the cause here. Otherwise, Very quickly around multimodal transportation. I'm not going to speak too much on this. Just know that TransLink has a lot of different resources, right? You can put buses or your bikes on buses and SkyTrains, and there are bike parkade lockers for you, rather bike parkades where you can lock your bike, and bike lockers as well. There's an update that you should know. If you have an e-bike or are planning to get an e-bike, they are now allowed on buses, except that you have to abide by some of these guidelines. E-bikes have to weigh less than 55 pounds. So this is why also it matters, especially if you're trying to do multimodal transportation with your e-bike, make sure that it is light enough. I mean, most of the e-bikes, especially if it has a removable battery, it should, if once you remove that battery, it should weigh less than 55 pounds. Okay. So the best way to test out whether or not your e-bike's wheels and even all of this fits is to physically test it out before you put it on a bus in real time. So this means that there are, for those of you who haven't done this before, there are videos online where you can Google it and figure out how to put your bus on, or rather how to put your bike on the bus. Especially with your e-bikes, we highly recommend that you take it to one of the, not 2, but 5 demo stations. This slide has not been updated, but in the follow-up email, we will send you a link to the 5 demo stations that are in the Lower Mainland right now. There's one at Main Street Central, just outside of the SkyTrain station. There's one at Vancouver City Hall. There's one at City of North Vancouver's City Hall Plaza. There's one in Port Moody, and there's one in Coquitlam, I believe. And so we'll send you the locations of those demo stations. If you live close by, roll it over, test it out. If you don't, roll your e-bike over to the closest bus depot. Ask the bus driver when they're on a break or waiting for their next shift if you can try it out. And usually they're very gracious about it because they want you to do it right in real time. Okay. Just around e-bikes on transit, not any different than conventional bikes. Okay, so just know that there are some restrictions on weekdays, of course, on the Expo and Millennium lines. Otherwise, mostly allowed on all the lines and all of the different public transit options. Okay, I think that's all of the materials that I want to go through. We are, apologies, we're about 2 minutes over, but any other questions before we finish off so that I can help answer your questions here? Is there anything, Mike, that you would like to highlight?
I think we answered them all, unless someone has a lingering question.
Okay, great. Okay, I'll just pause here for another moment in case anybody wants to chime in voice or in chat. Again, as I mentioned, if we did not answer your questions, apologies, for this hour is pretty tight with a lot of information. Please feel free to email us with your questions. Otherwise, if you feel that you want to review some of the rules of the road, whether or not this is for conventional biking or e-biking, there are a couple courses that are really accessible on Hub's website. Learn to Ride Online, targeted specifically at 9 to 12-year-olds, even though the information is really relevant for all ages, as well as a streetwise cycling course online that you can register for, specifically targeting any adult audience as well. Okay, so that's something that you can access online. If you're a Hub member, thank you so much for your support over the years. If you're not, know that this is a way to, number one, amplify the voices of making cycling better in Metro Vancouver, and also you get plenty of perks as well, bike shops, car sharing, bike sharing companies as well, free minutes and other things. So feel free to check us out on our website if you feel like exploring becoming a member. Otherwise, Thank you so much for making the time. As I mentioned, there will be a follow-up email, not only with additional resources, but also a course feedback survey that we would really appreciate if you can take a minute, just fill it out and let us know if some of the information is helpful and if there's anything else that you would like us to integrate into either this workshop or maybe a new workshop down the road in this series. And we really appreciate your participation, and yeah, and looking forward to seeing all of you on the bike lanes with your e-bikes, perhaps down the road. Okay, so I'm going to just stop sharing the slide, and we'll be here for another couple minutes in case folks want to stick around for questions. Great, thank you all. And yes, if you are looking to recommend to other folks, to attend, yes, I think that there are ongoing public webinars. There are a few different topics. There's e-biking, there's route planning, there's also basic bike maintenance and intro to city cycling and cycling with children as well. There's a number of different topics that you can sign up for down the road. We are going to be hosting them throughout the year. Great.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. See you soon. All right, so we'll sign off here and take care.